Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. A few details about this podcast before we get started. Details about this podcast episode and more can be found at zachbitter.com. My website is where you can find all details about the podcast, including episode notes, links, timestamps, and a full transcript. You can also find my social media channels and newsletter sign up there. If you want to support the show and also gain access to an intro and ad-free audio version of every episode, as well as early release, consider joining the show Patreon page. You can also access my coaching services, which include my virtual group coaching package, products that I use, my Amazon storefront, which highlights a wide range of training and racing items that I use. Please consider sharing episodes you like on social media, liking, commenting, and writing a review. It really goes a long way in reaching new listeners. As a way to thank listeners who engage, I am raffling a 30-minute consultation with me every month for anyone who shares, leaves comments, and reviews the podcast. Just remember to tag me or send an email to hpopodcast@gmail.com to let me know if I'm not already tagged so I can add you to the raffle. Also, if you have suggestions for show topics or guests, you can also send those to that email address as well. Finally, a big thanks to S Fuels, John G, Delta G Ketones, and Element Electrolytes for sponsoring this podcast. Links and discounts to these brands can be found in the show notes as well as at zachbitter.com. I also left a more formal description of each of these brands at the end of the episode. All right, let's get into the show.
I was listening to your podcast episode. I think it was the one that you shared with me. If not, it was good either way. It was the most recent one you had put up on yours where you kind of reversed the roles and were interviewed yourself. And I thought that was a real fun listen.
Thanks, man. Yeah, my friend Lowell, we've known each other for a long time. We met back in Austin. So, back in the day.
Really?
And he was there when I first quit smoking and was like, I'm going to start running. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, one thing I was thinking about after listening to that is when you guys talked about, you kind of had a topic where he was trying to kind of dig in with you about just like, what is it about ultra running that seems to collect a higher than average number of people who have a former addiction? So the natural thing to think about is like, oh, well, this is a very extreme kind of addictive type of a sport. So it's just playing into that same kind of mentality of someone who can just happens to have that personality trait where addiction is something that they be paying attention to a little bit closer than maybe on average. And I was thinking about that. I was like, I wonder how, because I kind of pieced these two things together based on that topic. And then another topic you two talked about, which was he was digging into your why. And you were kind of you're pushing back a little bit with like, hey, I'm not the weirdo. I'm the one who's actually trying to move, which is what our bodies are intended to do in the first place. So it's like, yeah, we've put ourselves in cages kind of to some degree. So my thought is maybe it's kind of the reverse of that, where ultra running isn't attracting addictive personalities, but like people are finding ultra running because it is sort of what our bodies are hardwired to do. And when you think of, people think of like, they'll go and they'll watch like a Jim Walmsley documentary and they'll be like, oh man, that's got to be horrible for your body. But yeah, that's not what most ultra runners are doing. Most ultra runners are kind of doing hunter gatherer style pacing almost, where they're, walking, running a little bit, walking, running a little bit. And I think it does sort of feed into just a little bit more of like, all right, I got this urge because I'm artificially being domesticated into these boxes, and this is my outlet to get out of that. And it kind of just matches what someone would be doing. And your description of kind of like, oh yeah, when I'm hanging out on the beach with friends or something like that, they just want to sit around and relax. I'm like, hey, does anyone want to just go for a walk? Yeah, I think that's the drive. I think it's that drive to do something different from what we've been conditioned to do.
Yeah, it's like saying, oh, why are you addicted? Every day you're eating and breathing and stuff. Why are you always doing that? It's just like a natural thing. So yeah, I think you're right. It's like people use drugs and alcohol and stuff to self-soothe, because they're anxious or whatever. And, using running to self-soothe is very natural. It's like, there's a lion, maybe I should run.
Yeah. Right. And so like the reverse of it is just like, I don't know that the addictive personality is necessarily like I don't think the symptom, I think we're blaming the symptom sometimes where, or the result of like, oh, I've got this addictive personality, so I'm going to go and do drugs and get stuck on them, or alcohol, or whatever it happens to be. I think it's also something where it's like, the first problem was we took a person and we stuck them in a box.
Right.
And had you not put them in the box, then they probably are getting whatever it is they're getting from that drug, that soothing that you were just describing,
Mm-hmm.
from just getting around, from just existing, from surviving, essentially. We're spoiled as runners because we experience like some degree of probably runner's high almost every time we step out the door and go for a workout. And if something starts to kind of dull a little bit, we just switch the input to something from an intensity standpoint, and then we get it back
Mm-hmm.
again. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So I
It's like
think
you're
it's,
saying. It's almost like a dog they go kennel crazy when they're stuck in the kennel for too long or whatever. They're stuck at the Humane Society or whatever, so they wouldn't have to like want to run crazy or bite people and stuff if had they not
Mhm.
been stuck in that cage.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually funny you mentioned that because I mean I know you're currently training a dog, so you'll probably be able to relate to this. We've got an Aussie who's about 4 years old, and she's very active and conditioned too, so it's like a double a double
Yeah.
whammy with those breeds. And she's also bred to like work and identify what work is. So she's identified, oh, when we get up in the morning, and it's usually Nicole, I get up, and when she goes out for her run, I go with her, and that's my job. I bark at the other dogs. I maybe try to chase a squirrel. I use the bathroom. I run around town. It's like that's her job in her mind. So like occasionally Nicole will be say she's going to like Rogue or somewhere like that to do a workout, and Minnie doesn't get to come. So she gets up, everything's happening like a typical morning. She walks out the door, Minnie gets left behind, total depression. and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
and then like I'm kind of like her last resort option. It's like, oh well,
You're
Zach is
your
Zach is
drugs.
still here. Maybe. So then when I like put her leash on and take her out, those runs, she's like so well behaved because I think she's seeing it as like, oh man, I thought I missed out on my opportunity. Turns out I got it. I better make
Mhm,
sure I showcase my best self today. so
mhm. Nice,
so I
nice.
can't guarantee this, but it is funny to see that. So it's like we got those examples through our dogs too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's not, waste all this content. We should start recording, huh?
Oh, I'm recording. Yeah, this is going to be
Oh, okay.
the intro
Oh, okay,
segment.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I've started just hitting record like right when I hop on usually because it's
Nice.
just one of those things where it's like it's easy enough to cut it out if we just aren't making anything worthwhile.
Right,
But if we do say something that's fun or is a good clip, then it's at least documented.
right. Okay, cool.
Right on. Yeah, but yeah, let's maybe jump into some specific stuff because I think like I think that you'll be a fun guest on here for like a variety of reasons, but one of them is just, I mean, we've been working together now for a little over a year. And when I think of just the coaching side of ultra running and then and the runner side too, or the participant side, I should say, I think you're just such a good example of what could be used as like, okay, how do we take some of the stuff that we at least think we know about training methodology or the approach to it and everything like that, but also be mindful of the fact that this isn't in a laboratory and it isn't necessary. It's rare, very rarely with a professional who is building their life around training and racing. It's oftentimes the other way around. And that's going to range from person to person based on kind of what they have from like family, social life, work, career, interests, all that stuff. But, at the end of the day, most people are going to be kind of close to you in the sense that they have like a big interest in the sport. It's rare that you're doing an ultra marathon if you're not interested in it because it's just a lot of work and a lot of potential pain and suffering to do something you hate. But you've also got other interests and passions. And I think you're interesting, especially interesting because you kind of have the typical ones where like you've got a job, you've got a social life, but you've also got interests in other activities outside of just ultra running too. So
Mhm.
then how that kind of plays out from like a programming standpoint and then a training standpoint is less about like, well, if we go and we find like the best training input you could ever draw up, how does that actually apply or how does that actually fit? How does that puzzle piece actually fit given all the things that you bring to the table versus a laboratory experiment, so to speak. And I think that's one of the more fun things for people to kind of solve, because it's going to be an individual question at the end of the day, is like, how do I mesh my ultra running training with, the obligations I have to do, and then the things I also want to do alongside that. And the more curious the person, I think the more interesting that gets, because there's always going to be something, and potentially something new, that comes up along the way that we have to look at. It's like, how does this directly impact the training? How does it feed into it, maybe in a positive direction, for us to work on something that we weren't before that may actually turn out to be like a big net win? So yeah, like how does that kind of like play into kind of the approach? So I think with you, it's it's a lot of the standard stuff, but then it's also kind of like new things that you're exploring too. Like you recently decided to kind of figure out a way to engage with the hunting world a little bit, which, obviously is another time consuming thing, but how do we plug that in with training? How do we use that or the seasons of it in a way where we're kind of structuring your training to best, best navigate that? Or you got a new dog, how does that play in? I think dogs are really interesting training tools to some degree. I know like Nicole's had dogs in the past where she's been more fit going into her races because of that, because now she's running with this dog or taking this dog out and getting kind of extra training, so to speak, along with kind of trying to do the right thing for that particular interest or hobby and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's fun. There's also, I right now have some privilege too, because I've been training, I don't know, 14 years or something in ultras. And so I do, like last Saturday we had programmed, you had assigned like an hour, a longer run with some strides at the end. And I was like, well, I'm going to skip this run and I'm going to go hunting. But also, I've got a lot of long runs in. This is my off season. Like, what's the big deal? Like, how much am I going to go from, at my next race, I'm going to go from 259th place to 260th place because I missed this workout. But then what I ended up doing was, a 12-mile hike with 4,000 feet of game with a 40-pound pack and sometimes knee-high snow post-holing, going very quietly, following tracks, stopping to see if the elk poop is still, it's not, oh, this elk poop isn't frozen yet, so it's fresh. So let me follow these tracks because it's a big bull. And so, just being quiet, sneaking around in the woods, which is, it's like kind of like childhood dream too. So it's like, I didn't feel guilty about it one bit, but yeah, juggling all those things are fun and interesting. And it's helpful too, because, a lot of times you can get burnt out, like, training for a 100-mile race, you're doing like 8-hour runs every weekend or something like that. You could be, there at the end is what I did before Bear. And I was like, I started getting a little burned out because it wasn't like free fun running either. It's like, okay, I'm trying to nail my nutrition. I got to have my hydration just right because it's summer or I'll die. And so just doing all of those things can be stressful. So it's nice to kind of like, now there's kind of we're doing an off season. So it's like, oh, cool. I'm like lifting weights, get to ride the bike on Zwift, do a lot of hiking, whatever. And then running too, like trying to keep the speed from getting away from me while, we're kind of switching the focus. It's fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you hit on a couple things that I find really interesting. And one is just like, how do you keep it exciting? And we're drawn to the 8-hour long run because that's one of the reasons we signed up for ultra running, because the idea of going out into the woods for 8 hours is rewarding in some capacity. But it is also kind of an unsustainable activity to some degree, where if you start kind of reading the old Anton Kropytka blogs and deciding to be doing 200-mile training weeks year round, then, you can find yourself in trouble at some point, or just kind of losing that passion, which I think is interesting because sometimes that kind of creeps up on you to where you start normalizing the fact that you're not really enjoying it quite as much as you used to, until you get to a point where you really recognize, hey, why isn't this as much fun anymore? And then you've sort of dug yourself into a hole. And then you kind of end up in this, like, I think this really polarizing position where you think like it's all or nothing, when in reality, it's more about what input can we change here that's still going to be productive for whatever you want to do from a goal standpoint. But it's also going to kind of keep that phase of training when we do get to a point where we want to send you out into the mountains for half a day on Saturday or maybe longer, and you're excited to do it. so you're getting the physical benefits from that, but also you're not hating the fact that you're, training for a 100-mile race or whatever happens you're doing. And, there's enough inputs I think that are important if we look at from like a calendar year standpoint, that it's not as hard, I think, as people maybe think to kind of decide, all right, this is a good time or a good opportunity to plug in these. And like your strength work and speed focus right now, I think is great because for one, you're coming off of a build for a 100-mile race where we did a lot of long volume stuff. So in terms of us maximizing improvements there, we've got a lot less space. And we also have this opportunity where now when volume's lower, if we can get you strong and fast, then when we get into the actual structured training for another ultra marathon, it's not as needed for us to be like super rigid with that, making that the primary anymore, because we can afford to just sustain it versus add to it. And then that sort of frees up your opportunities to do kind of the more ultra specific stuff a little bit at the end. So thinking of the training in seasons, even, I think sometimes is like a valuable way for people to look at it and not beat themselves up when they see their friends go out for a long weekend session and they're, in the gym pulling weight off the ground or something like that, or out in the fields hunting, which in your case has turned into some basically ultra specific long runs to some degree.
Yeah, it's a challenge, especially, luckily I hunt with my girlfriend a lot, and and she's a mountain athlete. She doesn't run or anything, but she was a competitive, like she did cycling and she competed in mountain biking in college. She's a ski patroller. She does guiding, all that stuff. So I was hoping that when we'd go out here into the mountains that I'm just going to be like blowing her socks off with all my fitness. And she's just as fit as I am. I'm like, man, come on. And we're doing like, 4,000 feet of gain in a day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is killing me. I thought we were just going to be walking around in the woods. We got a rifle on and a pistol for the bears and all this other stuff. You got to have snacks. So it's, I was thinking it was going to be easier than it was. And it turns out, I didn't feel bad if I missed any training. I was like, whatever, I couldn't have done any more effort today than I did. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also think that's kind of somewhat underrated from an ultra running standpoint too, where we even though I think most people who are going into and have done 100-mile races, they realize walking and hiking is going to be a component and likely a big component of getting to the finish line as fast as they can. But in training, we tend to sort of, I think, minimize that to a large degree, where we think of all the training being like, okay, I should be running. And then when you look at like the percentage of structured running versus structured hiking that you're probably going to see in the average person's training versus what they actually end up doing on race day, it's probably skewed quite a bit towards the running side of things. And when you can find time to, there's nothing unique about walking and hiking that wouldn't make it something that if you get more efficient at it, you're going to move faster at the same intensity. So to some degree, like if we can get you to walk and hike half a mile per hour faster on average at the same intensity, you compound that over, a third of a 100-mile race, that's a pretty big needle mover. So when someone has an interest that, or just like some hobby, or even just like an interest to do more hiking in their training, if they're in a race that's going to have a lot of that, I always think, okay, this is actually like a pretty big win here. We're going to actually practice something they're going to use on race day. And, as long as we're not ignoring kind of the more general fitness components that are also important to just making you like, a better mountain athlete in general, or just a better runner in general, then there's a lot of room for that.
Yeah. Over the New Year's, almost a year from now, I did the, across the years 200 miler. And man, I got to tell you, who inspired me was the Jester. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah. I just saw him a couple of weekends ago at Fat Ox.
Bro, that guy can walk faster than I can jog. Like he can walk so fast. I mean, he's got long legs. He takes really long strides, and he's going. And he's got outfits on, y'all. So like, it's impressive. And
you'll know he's there.
He might have a teddy bear with him, or who knows, But he must be doing like 14-minute. 13-minute, 12-minute miles walking. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like if I really book it like a mall walker, I'm doing like 16, 14 maybe. And so like sometimes on my walks, I'll I'll imitate him. I'll do this big, long, loping walk. And man, I'm like, God, he is so good at that. And I was like, if I
Yeah.
could just get better at that, that would be something. Another thing I noticed today or Saturday when I was out hunting, I mean, my heart rate got up to 135, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And some of those parts. And I was like, yeah, this is, yeah, I mean, I would be running at this or maybe even lower, you know, on the prescribed run, except for, you know, I did it for 9 hours instead of whatever, 1 hour. So yeah, it's interesting. Another thing that benefit that I've gotten from all the hiking and walking is I've always had very tight Achilles. Um,
Mhm.
and I came into running like right at Born to Run. So I started
Yeah.
running. My first big run was like at Rocky Raccoon 50 miler, and I ran it in Tom's, those little espadrille shoes. And yeah, I was hit the ground and I was doing all that like minimalist running. And that stuff is tough on your Achilles if you're not used to it, especially if you have tight Achilles. Then you throw a mountain in there. So what I have been doing over the summer, I would, at first we were doing mostly like 2.5 hour runs or something like that for my long run development. But then as we got closer to the 100 miler, those got longer. And then I was keeping those on flat because I wanted to just like get as much speed out of it and get as many miles out of it, both for my ego and for like speed's sake. And then, but as we went into the mountains, I mean, more towards the longer stuff, I started putting the mountains in, but I feathered it in because I knew in the past when I went straight into mountains, my Achilles would just be killing me. But
Mhm.
what happened was because I just luckily got it right, I've developed a lot more flexibility in like I can have my heel down on the mountain when I'm running up it, which is new for me. Like that's never happened before. So I'm like, oh, this is so sweet. Because forever I tried just the static stretching, but I'd seen this research about like where strength conditioning athletes were getting more mobility just from like saying doing deadlifts rather
Mhm.
than just trying to touch their toes. And the test was to touch your toes. So the people who were the group that was trying to just touch their toes were basically studying for the test, but the deadlifters got more flexible, which I mean makes sense because you got this big old weight trying to pull you down. So I was like, oh, I just need to do more strength training. And when I'm doing the strength training, trying to get as long into the stretch position as I can, so I can get more, um, a little more mobility in my like hamstrings and stuff because I can barely touch my knees when I'm doing. I don't do toe touches. I'm trying to do a shin touch one day, but
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
No, I hear you. Like, I think like the range of motion stuff is it's definitely something where when you add weight to the obviously you want to be careful, but like yeah, if you try to just bend over and touch your toes, your limiters, your central governor or whatever you want to call it is gonna sort of say, hey, stop right there, regardless of whether, I mean, your hamstrings aren't going to snap in half if you went a little bit further, but you add a little bit of weight and all of a sudden that kind of like gravity of that weight kind of just extends and pulls it down without it. Maybe it's just you're being distracted by the fact that you're holding that weight and you're more concerned with stabilizing that than you are your hamstrings lengthening. And then it kind of releases and kind of works. But it is a great way to kind of extend that range of motion is to get into the weight room and do some stuff like that. The other one I find that's like a really good passive thing that I do. Sometimes I've got super tight hamstrings too, and it's always been that way. Like before I even started running, I've always had like a limiter there relative. So I'll just like for maybe 30 minutes a day, if I'm just checking emails or something like that, I'll take the laptop down on the ground, just sit up against the wall with my legs out, and then I'll get a good stretch just from sitting in that position. And then over time, you're able to just tolerate that position a little bit longer. And if you want to add a progression to that, you can just put like a little yoga block or something under your heels, and you can do that too. But yeah, I think just putting our bodies in these positions that we want them to be able to do, or working towards those, is sort of the use it or lose it method, I guess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and I would say too with that, using like say that again the deadlift, that one's interesting too because you're not only are you stretching down to maybe the same depth as you would if you were trying to do toe touches, but then in that position now you're going to like try to lift the weight. You're like contracting the
Yeah.
muscles in their most stretched, which you are generally aren't. I'm not. I'm not doing it on purpose, trying to do that when I'm trying to stretch. I'm just trying to like push my hands down as far as I can and wince and whatever and cry.
Yeah. Yeah. I do kind of want to rewind a little bit, Scott, and just chat a
Mhm.
little bit about kind of you as an ultra runner and dig in a little bit there if you don't mind. Um, One thing I wanted to ask is just like, if you don't mind sharing, like, because this is just always, I think, an interesting question because it's such a variety of different experiences, I think, is like, what actually got you first interested in ultramarathon?
Okay, yeah. Well, in about, I think it was like 2009, I was smoking about a pack and a half a day and partying hard down in South Austin. And I mean, I just got sick of cigarettes. I mean, they're amazing. Don't get me wrong. You know, you want a cigarette, you smoke a cigarette, you're like, oh, that was a good idea. But after it's just a habit. You got to keep up with it. You got to keep buying them. And it smells like hell. So yeah, one day I eventually was like, I am sick of this, and I took my cigarettes and took them and threw them in the trash. And then it was like, I'm going for a walk. And so then I went for a walk, and I was like, well, look, it takes 7 minutes a cigarette, 30 cigarettes a day. That's 210 minutes. What are you going to do with that 210 minutes? And I said, well, I used to wander around a lot when I was a kid. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll run. I like to run, or I liked to run. And so even when I played soccer in high school, I would, take my soccer ball and just push it around for miles. I didn't even think of it as running. I was like, I'll go practice dribbling. So then, so yeah, I ran to the end of my block, and I was like, woof, that's enough for today. And then I think I, my now my friend Lowell recalls it as like the next day I went and did like 9 or 13 miles or something. I don't think I was running. I think I just went for a long walk.
Uh-huh.
But then in my neighborhood there was a little park, and so that had a track going around it. People play kickball and stuff. And so I would jog around that, and then I was like, I need to make friends because I don't have any running friends. So Joe Prusitis had started this Hill Country Trail Runners Club there in Austin. Had like at the time like 400 members or something. So I was
Mhm.
like, oh, trail running, that sounds amazing. So I went and met up with them. And, there's not a lot of like 5K trail runs, or maybe now there are, but like back then it was like, oh, if you're going to trail run, then whatever. It's like, you got to run a 50 mile or whatever, or 100 miler. And so I asked some old timers in the group, I said, you think I could run 50 miles? And they were like, sure, you could do that. Like, I think they were like poking each other. Yeah, you could do that. Go ahead. First race, do it. And so, yeah, that was, so within the first year of running, did that Rocky Raccoon 50 miler. I think it was like 3 16-mile loops or something like that. And it was back when I know there's like Little Rocky and then there's Rocky Raccoon, and those are two separate races. This is one that Joe Presidas had, and it was the same. I think it was the same day as the 100 miler,
Mhm.
and so you got to watch that carnage and stuff. So that was fun. But yeah, I ran that 16 mile pretty fast. I was like, how far back am I from the leader? And then walked the other 2 laps because I was like so destroyed. And yeah, it took me like I don't know. It was dark when I finished, and it was summer, I think. So it must have been a long time. Probably I don't know how many hours. A lot. But so yeah, that's how I got into it. And it's just a sweet, welcoming community. Went on all these like runs with people. They're like, hey, we're gonna go run 20 miles. I'm like, I don't know if I could do that, but I'll come. And then did all that, got to meet like Micah True from the Born to Run fame. So like all these people would come to some Italian place as where we'd have our monthly meetings or whatever. And so I got to learn about drop bags and all these things. I was like, oh, drop bags. Wow. Okay. Because I think the internet was pretty light on like ultra running stuff. Like, yeah, it was
Mhm.
like books. That's where you got most of your stuff, or word of mouth.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting parts about ultra running to me is the fact that we still have to rely pretty heavily on like anecdotes or like combinations of successful anecdotes. And I
Mhm.
think what that does is it builds a community where there's this drive to share it, not just like, oh, well, if someone asks me, or even worse, I'm going to hide this because I don't want someone else to figure it out. It's kind of more of a like, if they see, it's like, rather than the new person having to work up the courage to go and ask, it's like, oh, there's a new person, I'm gonna go tell them about this. And you learn a lot that way. And then the other thing that you mentioned that I think just is more probably specific to the greater running community in general is it's like such a fun sport to get into, because if you're in a city like Austin, and Austin's probably like an exaggerated example of this, is you show up to a group run and a lot of the friction of meeting new people gets kind of pulled away, because you go to the group run, you already know that everyone's there's going to be, completing this 5K loop or whatever happens to be, whatever the route is. Once you start, you just end up with the people that are your pace, and that sort of kind of that puts you in a group, and then you're talking to those people, you get to know those people, and then so it kind of like it sort of like hits fast forward on some of those like areas of friction of meeting new people that would normally be something you'd have to like go out of your way to do. It just kind of like selects for that with the activity itself. Yeah, and then everyone finishes and feels great, so they're all talkative, and it's just a great socializing atmosphere. So like, yeah, the number of people that I think just get into running because they decide, all right, or find a lot of value from it, I guess, outside of just the exercise component, is like going to like your local group run and things like that, and meeting new people, learning something from someone else, and then you're compelled. I heard you talk about this on a podcast you were on too, where when you first got into ultra running, you met Andy Jones Wilkins, who, he's been around forever, and has been, I would consider him like a Western States 100 historian at this point, as well as just a sport historian within it too. And I mean, he just like gave you his phone number, said, call me if you have any questions. And, you're not going to walk up to someone of that stature in any other sport and walk away with their phone number in most cases. So like, unless you have something else that's immediately available to offer them. And it's just like, I think there's like that compulsion to say like, okay, well, I'm going to share something with someone who needs it, because then when they get to a spot where I'm at, where they have the knowledge, there's going to be someone new and they're going to be able to do the same thing. And if you can kind of keep the momentum from that going, it's such a great self-feeding machine.
Yeah. There's and when I asked Andy Jones Wilkins, I said, hey, what can I give you? Like, can I Venmo you or whatever it was then? It was like 2017. And I was like, can I send you some money or something? I know your time, you're a teacher or whatever. He was some kind of school administrator doing all that stuff. And he was like, no, he's like, people have helped me out in the past. All I ask is that you help the next guy. And so, I mean, and that's what I'm doing right now. Like, I have that readyforultra.com website, and we recorded a bunch of stuff for the Bighorn races this past year, where I was like just having informational sessions and Q&As and stuff with the race director and all of the different race organizer people. And, and at first, like, Michelle was like, she's a race director. It's her baby. So she's like, what's your angle, buddy? What are you trying to get out of this? What are you trying to do over here? Because, I'm sure there's the culture landscape of ultra running has changed a good bit, I would say, in the past 5 years, with the influx of people coming off of, maybe through big podcasts that you've been on, and stuff like that, and like, these rah people that are leaders in thought communities, and they're bringing in people who are newbies, who aren't coming at it from an ultra running group. Maybe they don't have any friends. Maybe they haven't thought to seek out a group or know that groups exist, because it's just people who are like, you don't know me, son. They're coming from those people. They're not coming from like, run club or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to kind of build this thing to help those people to kind of put the civics out there, the kind of like, hey, you find someone on the trail, it doesn't matter if it's a race or not, and they're in distress, you need to help them out. Like, Destination Trail, they actually have that. I think it was Destination Trail. They actually put that in their rules, which is nice, because so then people at least consider it, whereas I think people that have been in it a while, they would never, you see someone out there on the trail, you're like, man, you got to help them out. They might die, literally. Yeah. So it's like, it's the different thing about this sport. Other sports, you don't help them out, like whatever. They're still at the baseball stadium or whatever.
Right.
Someone else can help them. But out where we run, if you don't help them, they might not find the body,
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, there is that. Yeah, you've been in a dark enough place at some point where you know how bad it could get, and if someone else is there, then the impulse is to, okay, how do I assist versus all right, someone else will take care of that. So yeah, it's interesting. That actually brings up an interesting point too, because that series that you guys put together for Bighorn, I feel like that should be something that's like reproduced for other events too, because just from one thing I've learned with kind of coaching and then just doing the sport is there's a lot of stuff that gets ignored prior to the signing up of an event that could easily like really improve the performance that is almost 100% independent of the training and fitness side of things. Things as simple as just like kind of having an idea of like, oh, what is going to be a good strategy for navigating the aid stations on this course versus the ones I've been on in the past, or if you've never done it before, just in general. Or like, so having those like kind of like tools on race websites that like you can just send people to say like, all right, go through these before you sign up for it, so you get an idea if this is actually something you want to try to apply all your hard work towards versus something other that you could do that towards. And I mean, I just recently recorded a podcast on, I think there was like 7 things that you should consider like as you're signing up for, or maybe like right away after you've signed up for an event, just to make sure like I'm going to go into this training block with as many opportunities to practice some of these things as I can, so it's as intuitive as possible when you get out to do something that you're either going to do rarely or in some cases never before. And I think that sort of stuff is like probably would be a huge asset for any race that's attracting like large numbers of people.
Hey folks, just a quick reminder that this podcast sponsors include S Fuels. They have a 15% offer for you. Element Electrolytes, they have a free sample pack offer for you. John G Apparel has 10% off, and Delta G Ketones has a 20% off and free consultation offer for you. Links and details can be found in the show notes and the episode landing page. You can also check out a full description of how I use all of these products in my own training and racing at the end of this podcast episode.
Yeah. It's interesting. I need to put something together for race directors, because it's like some people get it right, or some people try real hard, and put a lot of information together. I'm thinking Aerovipa, they not only do they have instructions for you as the racer or whatever, but like if you're working the aid stations, there are diagrams on how you're supposed to put the peanut butter and jelly on the thing, how you're supposed to cut bananas properly. What's her name? Is it Patty?
Patty Curry.
Yeah, Patty Curry. Yeah, she's got it dialed. But I mean, here's the one big thing that almost all race sites don't have is search. Like, hey, I'd like to search where the aid stations are, because it's like you get to a race website, I can't count how many of them just say have a tab called info. It's like, well, everything on this website is information. Is that where my aid stations are? No, that's under race day. I'm like, okay, well, I was looking for information about the aid station, so I thought it might be under info. If you had a search, then I could say, search where this thing is, or, search the aid station, and then all these things come up, the cutoffs, whatever. But that might be under crew instructions or whatever. It's like this endless mess. So that's another reason why I put this stuff on here on the Ready for Ultra website, because for instance, we took all those Q&As that people had. I downloaded the transcript. I published the recording too, so people could see those later. But then also I took the Q&As and got AI to pull it out and like make a document. So then now you can search that document instead of like having to scroll through the video and be like, well, what did she say about camping at the Civic Center or whatever it is? And so now you can just search all of these things. And so it's just trying to distill down the information, because it's not ideal for race directors to put together the information because they know everything. You know what I mean? So it's like you have to know that the bus schedule is a link to a Word document at the bottom of this page or whatever. You know what I mean? They know that, but but they already know the bus schedule. What about everybody else? It's like, so it's tough for them because they don't have the kind of beginner's mind, the outsider's mind, because they have all that stuff floating around in their head. They're being asked about it every day or fighting about it every day with the Forest Service or whatever. So it would be good to put together something for the folks, because it's tough. It's tough enough for a runner training and stuff. And then it's like, should I bring water? Is there going to be any ice? Maybe.
Yeah, I think like very descript things like that could be so useful for the user. And as the sport grows, I think this is going to just have a heavier incentive to do this. Because I'm thinking of it this way, like if I'm a race director, and I mean, ultimately I'm going to end up having partnerships with brands. They're going to sponsor the race, right? They're going to be the presenting sponsor, the nutrition sponsor, all these other things. So like if I'm going and I'm pitching my race to like a nutrition company that I'm going to look to bring on board, one of the things I'm gonna tell them that I'm going to do is like, look, every runner that signs up, let's say I have an event that's going to bring in like 500 runners or something like that. I'm going to tell them like one of the tools I'm going to send out to everyone who signs up for this race is a detailed description of where the aid stations are, what are at the aid stations, and why they should practice with what is at the aid station.
Oh yeah.
And if your product is sponsoring the event and they have it at that aid station,
Mhm.
and then the race director takes that extra educational step of saying, hey, you know what? If you're going to run 100 miles and be eating thousands of calories of these engineered fuels, maybe you want to play around with them in training.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah,
So like
yeah.
I think the ROI of a sponsorship with an event, when that some percentage of their participants are going to look at that and say, oh, well, I should at least engage with this product to find out if it works for me, because if it does, I can eliminate a huge logistical component of the race where now I don't need drop bags because I know they have this specific product at every aid station, and I can just grab and go with that and save myself a couple minutes. Things like that, I think. And that kind of goes back to what I was talking about before about some of that pre-planning of like, how can you actually run faster without running faster? Or how can you take your fitness and get all the benefits from it by not kind of losing time on logistical type things. But yeah, I mean, stuff like that is because I will laugh too. I'll say one more thing is like, the race directors always have a little bit of, I think, rightfully so to some degree, where like, oh, I'm getting all these emails and questions about like something that's on the website, and he's like, I would love it if I could just get only the questions that don't have clear answers to, versus having to answer this one question over and over again. It's like, well, if you're getting the same question over and over again and it's on the website, that's probably because it's not clear enough. Make it so easy that the person stumbles into it. and,
Yeah.
and you'll avoid that. So some of that's kind of like what you were saying, is having those search tools or those websites set up in a way where, if someone wants to know this, they're going to find it really easily, and then you're probably going to get less questions about it.
Yeah, I think in America, we everywhere, the whole world could benefit if everyone got a little bit of service design, like teaching when they're younger, because you see it all the time. My gym has a 2-lane track, and the inside's the slower lane, the outside's the faster lane, and they have put a sign on the outside lane. It says, "Check in the outside lane before passing to see for if there's runners coming." I mean, you put it in the outside lane, and your target audience is people who don't look in the outside lane, so
Yeah.
they're never going to see that sign. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what are you doing? Is this a joke? Like, I feel like
Yeah.
it's a joke. Anyways, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff like that. So,
It's like if you
but
put on
yeah.
the back of the toilet seat, "Hey, always put the toilet seat down." You would
Yeah.
never see that sign, you know? Like, but I will say one more thing about the nutrition thing, because
Yeah.
this is one thing that's really bugged me is in race day nutrition is like, I've worked a lot of races and worked a lot of aid stations, and I've seen this many times where it's like, okay, cool, I'm going to make some more tailwind. Okay, well, how much do I put in here? They're like, well, I usually put this much, but it's hotter today, so we're going to water it down some or whatever, or there's extra ice in it or something. And I'm like, well, dude, but these people have been like training for a year and they're depending on this fuel. Shouldn't we make it according to the directions? And they're like, and I'm like, dude, that's like, so there's that. But I will say this, that in dealing with talking to Michelle and the Bighorn community, that I don't know if Tailwind does this with every race, but I imagine they do when their sponsor is, that they say they make you sign something that say, we'll mix this to the specifications or whatever. So it has to be mixed like full, what they would expect it is, whatever it is, 40 grams for, or 20 something grams for a 16-ounce bottle, I think is what that ends up to being. So
Mhm.
that's a great start. But for a while I thought there should be a certification or a pledge that race directors sign that says, hey, I will make sure that all of the beverages, whoever the beverage sponsor is or whatever we're using, it's mixed in a way that we're communicating it in the way that we're communicating it. So like if we're saying, hey, it's all going to be full strength, whatever, or if it's all going to be half strength or whatever, or, you have to communicate it. And then you have to communicate it to the aid station, the captain of the aid station, and the captain of the aid station needs to make sure it's getting mixed that way. Because it's all good for the race director to sign that, but like, she's not going to be at all of the aid stations at a 100-mile race, right? And so it's up to the people that are right there to actually make sure that happens. And I just, it's like, people are up in arms about Spring Energy falsely advertising their macros or whatever. But like, that just happens all the time at every race, like where people are like, we got tailwind, but maybe it's just like water. You know what I mean?
Right,
like, oh, maybe it's tailwind flavored water, or maybe it's double strength, who knows? So, and when you have 5 to 20 miles between aid stations, when you're talking about 200 milers, then it's like, yeah, it makes a big difference, because you're going to be like, this is all the nutrition I'll have for the next 6 hours, maybe sometimes,
Yeah, that is really interesting, because it's like I would imagine it makes sense that like your example of tailwind, that they would try to reach out and say, hey, make sure you're doing this right. Because for them, it's like if they're making all sorts of promises, right? Like any marketing team is. And then someone goes and they get like an experience that's different from that, they're going to swear off that product pretty quickly. Or or if it's over concentrated and you get a digestive issue, nothing will turn a runner off from your product quicker than them associating it with a stomach ache. And it just psychologically too, it could be nothing to do with the actual formulation of the product. It could just be like, I always think back, like when I was a kid, I got a stomach ache because I ate like milk dud ice cream or something like that. And it's like, now I don't eat milk dud ice cream because whenever I think of it, I think of stomach ache. They don't want that association with their product. So you'd think like, yeah, for them to, there's an incentive for them to probably try to, I don't know what the solution is for them other than just saying like what you described. Maybe when sport gets bigger, it would be interesting if you had your ambassador team of people that are going to like, going to give them free product in exchange for like them saying, hey, yeah, I use this product. And maybe also have them like go out and volunteer at an aid station and then saddle them with like the proper formulations. It's getting mixed right, or an educational piece at least. But the other thing I was thinking with that too is like, if you're practicing with the product, this probably becomes a problem still later stage in a race, as like your palate gets a little jacked up from just fueling for the day. But early on, if I use a product and I'm mixing it myself in training, I get pretty accustomed, kind of like where I can sort of taste if it's, to a degree, if it's strong, average, or weak. So like if I roll into an aid station and like say the first aid station, I fill up my thing with theirs and I have it, I can probably tell like, yeah, this is weaker than what I was mixing at home, or this is stronger. Now, that's kind of a bad time to have that happen, because like you can't necessarily like remedy it perfectly. You're compromising to some degree, or grabbing something off the aid station to try to counteract that a little bit, because learning on the fly is never going to save you time. But it is, I guess, at the end of the day, something you could, I guess it would be, if anything, it'd be just a little bit of a motivator to maybe practice with the product you're going to use on race day, so you're intimate enough with all of the textures, flavors, and everything with it that you can kind of recognize different things about it that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. Otherwise, you're going with the package stuff, not the mix on the race table stuff.
It's tough, man, because it sucks mixing up things mid-race.
Yeah.
If you don't have a crew and stuff, then it's like you have to do all that stuff, and you're like, you don't even want to mess with it, and like, whatever.
And not all products mix evenly either. Like some have settling effects too. Like that's like, depending on what their ingredients are. Some of the more kind of like natural products tend to have a harder time with this, because they're not going to have all the stuff that kind of dissolves as easily in some cases, where, yeah, what's at the bottom of that 5-gallon jug might be different than what's at the top of that 5-gallon jug.
Yeah. And so, it's thing, I want them to put ice in that drink too. So it's like, it's hard to, even if you had some ratio, like, well, if you're going to put a 4-pound bag of ice, then it needs to be this much liquid, whatever, and it's going to change as it melts and whatever. So it's tough. But, one thing I was thinking about today, And I think about this a lot when people are like, fasted running is stupid and you're going to die.
Yeah.
And your legs are going to fall off as soon as you go out the door because you're fasted and whatever. Is that the pushback in my mind, one of them, there's many, but like there's just like a lack of nuance when people talk about this stuff. It's all like, no, jam it or slam it. That's all there is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there's one of the things is that if you get into that situation where you're like, oh man, you leave the aid station, oh, this is pretty much almost water. If you had only ever just been completely fueled on all your runs, then you might be like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Am I going to die or whatever? But if you've done 4-hour runs, you're like, big deal. I'll just get some of the next aid station or like suck on a mint or something, And similarly, like if you have a little bit of a barf fest and you're like, you know what, it's just not working out for me to eat right now. I got to give it some time. Then like, in a 200-mile race, say, you could just like not eat anything for 4 hours. That happens.
Mm-hmm.
And people, it works out just fine. It's just like sometimes you got to take a break. And then what are you going to do? Quit? Like, no, you just take a break and you got some fuel, man. Just take it easy and, get some, if you can get down a ginger chew or some candy or something, whatever. You don't have to worry about like, oh my gosh, well, I'm not going 60 grams per hour, 90 grams an hour, 150 grams per hour. Like, what's going to happen? You're just like, well, I know what happens. I've done this before, and big whoop,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You raised some good points there. I put up kind of like a joke when the Spring Energy issue started kind of getting some momentum, and it's basically like, well, it turns out people using Spring Energy are more fat adapted than they thought.
Yeah.
Because it's the same thing kind of. It's like you wonder how much is psychological too, of just like, oh, okay, I got this sense of relief because I hit my target versus did you actually need it or not? Yeah. And I think, you bring up a point that I find just really interesting with respect to kind of preparing someone for a race too, especially these longer races, is getting in the mindset of don't or be ready to expect something to go wrong. Don't think like, okay, a perfect day means everything's going to happen according to script. It's just not going to. The question is, when is the script going to be deviated from? And then knowing that that's going to happen and that there's going to be like some tools that you can use to remedy it, whether it be like what you said, okay, I'm just going to like let my stomach chill for a little while. It's not the end of the world. I can go an hour without eating. My stomach will come back around then, and then I'll start eating again. Versus, oh, this is the terrible end of the world. I can't eat now. I won't be able to eat for the rest of the race. That's 10 hours. I'll die. That's where your mind wants to go. So like, I think just going into the event expecting like, oh yeah, there's going to be this hurdle at some point, and it's going to be something I wasn't really wanting to have happen, but I can still have my best day if I just recognize what it is when it is, and I kind of circle things around it and make the best decision from there. And that I think just at the end of the day is just kind of like if I had to sum up ultra running experience on race day, is like one of the kind of key pillars of just getting yourself to the finish line versus kind of finding yourself dropping out or giving up early or something like that, which, those things have their place too. But, sometimes if it's something like, if you're expecting perfect every time, you're going to have a lot more unsuccessful days in your mind than if you assume like there's some problem solving as part of the game.
Yeah. It's part of the fun, it's like, and then it makes life easier too. Cause you're like, if you're used to like a sport where, barfing and pooping your pants is built into it, then like everyday life seems so much easier. You're like, oh man, this is nice. Like something goes wrong. I got a toilet right there. I got a shower, man, this is nice. I don't know. So when you hear people complaining about how hard life is, you're like, man, yeah, I guess for you.
Yep. Yeah. And another one I always like to share with people too is, I've had races before where like I hit a rough spot and I'm like, this is it for me. I'm done, and I drop out. And then, you go back to the hotel room, wherever, you take a shower and you're like, dang it. I feel good now. And it's just like the getting clean side of things. So like, I think Courtney DeWalter is probably the biggest example of this, where she'll brush her teeth, and, runners who've done that, you're cleaning out your mouth. Like you've just been jamming all sorts of engineered fuels and drinks and whatnot. And you just feel like, a kid on Halloween, where it's like, it feels good to brush your teeth. And like, just that will give you extra energy. Just that, like that sensation of like, okay, I just like took care of that. And so little things like that, where you start recognizing, oh, what could I do to kind of replicate that? Maybe have some like wet wipes or something at the aid station and clean off myself a little bit so I don't feel like I'm layered in sweat and dirt all the time, or quick brush my teeth after that aid station so that I feel like it, my mouth has a reset. It's funny how that stuff translates to sometimes your legs and your mental psyche.
Yeah, I did that for Bear. I used a lot of those little toothbrushes, and
Yeah.
because I think I bought them and it came in like a pack of 1,000 or something, so I have enough forever. I guess
Mhm.
until we find out whatever that those things will kill you. But I was doing that at Bear, like, and it was like the sun was coming up, and I was at this aid station. It was freezing cold. I was with my pacer, and man, we ate a little something, pancakes, and then I brushed my little teeth or whatever. I was like, well, whatever my number, 23 going out. They're like, you're gonna keep going, and I was like, God, do I look that bad? Because I felt great. I was like, this is fun, and so I was like, yeah, I'm going. Why wouldn't I? I'm like, I don't know. So yeah, just yeah, it does definitely clear doing little things like that, taking care of yourself, and you don't really have to stop to do those things. Generally, you can like
Mhm.
on your way out the aid station, just rub it across your teeth and get some of that carpet off your teeth, and then or when I was doing across the ears, whenever I had to like stop to go in the porta potty for a sit down, then I would take like a couple gloves. I'd take some wipes and everything. So when I come out of there, it'd be like a mini shower as well. So I was like,
Mhm.
I was a little lighter, I was a little cleaner, and I was like, yeah, fresh. Smell like
Yep.
tea tree oil and everything. So I was like, all right, grab a cup of coffee. All right, I'll just take a lap. Yeah.
Mhm. And I mean, this is just things that like you were talking about before too. If someone who's new to the sport, which we're seeing a lot of, or just, even new to running to some degree with the number of people that are coming into ultra these days, is that they're never going to think of that on their own, right? So they're going to need to hear that from someone like you as to like, oh, okay, maybe that would be a good thing to plan for. But yeah, it's interesting stuff. Um, I know, just kind of along the lines of, yeah, coaching and teaching and all that stuff. One of the other reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast here is because you're actually going to be joining me as a coach under kind of my umbrella of services. So I wanted to kind of just chat with you a little bit about like kind of a little bit about maybe your philosophy. I think we've talked about that to some degree here, but kind of what got you interested in kind of the coaching side of it? Was it just kind of organically starting to helping friends and stuff like that, and then you realize like, hey, maybe if I put my mind to some education and stuff around this, I could be more than just a question board for people?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've always taught in general. Like I've taught programming. I mean, even as a kid, I taught Vacation Bible School. Taught them all about Jesus and this and that. So like, I've always loved teaching and spreading information. And because like, well, I'm one of those people who I just like to fire hose myself. I have like a bajillion running books here, and some of them are baloney, some of them are great, some of them are baloney and great. Because like even you can be wrong and be helpful. So there's
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
all kinds of things there, and so it's like I think helping people, yeah, kind of distill that stuff. And to be honest, there's all this interesting science and there's a bunch of interesting products and stuff, but almost all that stuff doesn't even matter. Like, it's like sleeping and running and eating, and like almost all of it. But like figuring out how that works for you can be challenging, and realizing that some things have to be priorities. Like you're not going to get any adaptations if you don't sleep and eat. So it's
Hmm.
like got to at least have access to food and sleep, and some sort of manageable amount of stress. I'd say with like a lot of ultra runners, it's almost never that they're like not bumping up against the ceiling of the amount of stress that they're able to deal with. Like it's always that they're like needing to manage their stress so they're not overdoing it. And that's like all of stress. That just all comes together. It's not like you get to be like, well, that's just life stress. It doesn't matter. So yeah, just helping to get a perspective on that stuff, is helpful. And I'm one of those people who's an overachiever, and I have like two of my core values are curiosity and exploring, which means I'm always wanting to do more stuff. So I'm always like, I like running, but I also like play tennis and soccer and whatever. So then I have to be like, I have to manage those things. I have to be like, well, you can play tennis when you're 60. You're not going to be doing like ridiculous mountain running when you're 60, or I probably won't want to, because like when things go wrong, it's going to be even worse when you're old and stuff. And but like tennis, you know, hey, you fall down, you're just on the tennis court, whatever. So so yeah, I think, you know, I have, you know, special perspectives too. Like I don't necessarily uh, fall in with all of traditional running coaching. But to be fair, a lot of traditional running coaching, I say ultra running, would be like, it's just like repackaged 5K training, but longer and with more supplements, maybe. I don't know. But a lot more gear. So so it's interesting. I kind of take it more from a health perspective too. You know, I prioritize health sometimes over fitness. Like right now, especially right, like in my little off season, right? I'm doing weightlifting because I know that like the amount of muscle that I have. I mean, I'm getting old. I'm like 48. Sounds right. We'll go with that. Is I'm old enough to be like, I think I'm 48, and so you know, lifting the amount of weight, you know, the muscle that you have, the bone health that you have, is not only going to affect how long you live, how well you live, the amount of pain you experience, the amount of independence you get to have 20 years from now, but also like your happiness, your like your mental, like not mental health, but maybe probably not. Weightlifters are not known to be the most mentally healthy people. I'm kidding. Don't come after me, guys. No, but as far as like you know, like dementia and these sorts of, you know, mental problems, muscle helps with staving that kind of stuff off. Also with just like your blood sugar, things like that. There's just a lot of health things, and so I am willing to, you know, Christopher Hitchens said, in life we must choose our regrets, and I'm willing to go from 259th place to 270th place if that's what happens because I'm lifting weights. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but you know, I'm willing to take that chance. You know, so yeah. Sorry,
Yeah. Well,
I was starting to weave around on the road there.
that's fine. That's fine. That's what long form's for. So
Mm-hmm.
weave all you want. I'll say this. I think like one of the reasons why I got excited to kind of bring you on is because like you're super curious. So and you're not just curious for the sake of being curious. You're curious and then you do something about it. So like it's not like if you program something for someone that is like very unique from what we would typically see. It's not going to be because you're unaware
Right.
of what the traditional starting points are. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to be because you know what the traditional starting points are, but you've actually also unpacked the person's life and all the
Mm-hmm.
components that go into it that you saw, okay, it doesn't, kind of like we were talking about before, it doesn't really matter if on paper this is like the best physiological way to go about things. It's just not going to fit that person's lifestyle. It's not going to fit their interests. They're not going to be happy with it. Ultimately, they probably won't be consistent within it. And consistency is going to be kind of one of the biggest variables of success at the end of the day, because you know we're doing these things over and over again. So you know whatever path we choose, being consistent within is likely going to yield the best result. And I think you're going to do a really good job of teasing that out. Like it's not a weakness of yours to figure that out. I think that's a strength of yours. Like when you're working with someone 101, it's not going to be something where you're just like passively waiting for those things to present themselves. Is going to be something where you're going to go and find them, and if you don't know the answer to, you're going to ask about it, and then you're going to find them. So for a sport like ultra running, where there's like this tandem of like being aware of kind of the position statements and the starting points and what maybe works best on paper, but then being able to apply that appropriately to the person who has a ton of variables that don't necessarily engage with that position paper and those specific things, and be able to kind of like learn with them to some degree, but also give them a list of things that they can do that's going to be their best option based on what we know about them, and everything else is just going to be the quickest way to finding success for anyone specifically. So you know those sort of things aren't I wouldn't say normal, and I think they are what make good ultra running coaches. So the
Mm-hmm.
fact that you kind of just naturally gravitate toward them in without having to kind of force it or learn it necessarily is probably your biggest asset in my opinion.
Thank you, Zach. That's great. Yeah, I'll say, you know, there's I am curious, and so there are, in my mind, there's always. I don't know if you've ever seen Bobby's World. They'll have similar
Yeah.
accents. But he's always got this. His brain's just going off in the ether. Someone says some like, um, you know, that'll happen when pigs fly, and so he starts to imagine pigs flying and stuff like that. I kind of do that with all of this sport reading that I do. So I don't just read running stuff. I read, weightlifting stuff, running stuff, cycling stuff, boxing stuff. People are doing, and the Soviet era stuff. There's just all kinds of wacky things that people are trying.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily do it because I'm like looking for something. I'm just trying to like inspire myself to think like, what are some oddball things that people haven't thought of yet? And I'm not talking about like Joel Seedman weird weightlifting stuff on Bosu balls, but like our humans and then reality, we have to have like, we can't understand something unless we already have like a construct for it in our mind. Like, for instance, okay, like cycling people, they're doing stuff, the science will follow because people are like, oh, well, people are eating baking soda and then they're doing this or whatever. And so like, maybe we should study that or whatever. Whereas like, there's been these things like where they show people, some tribe, they showed a picture of, I don't know if this is real or not. I think it's real. I haven't double checked it, but it was in this nonfiction book I was reading. And they showed this tribe like a picture of an animal. And they were like, hey, this is a zebra or whatever. And the people were like, and they were like wrinkling it, making it sound. They couldn't see the picture. They didn't see that the picture was a picture of the zebra. They thought that we were talking about the paper. And so they were like sniffing the paper and like wrinkling it or whatever. And it's like, or like when, some Europeans came to the New World, they couldn't see the boats or something like that. I hear this story a lot because they didn't have a concept of it. They were like, well, that just must be a crazy cloud because like, what could that be? And so like, I think that we have that. So I'm always thinking about that stuff. But most of the time, it's going to be in reality. And most of the truth for a person's running, for their fitness journey is going to be in that stuff that they like to do, right? Because, you said that consistency is a large part of it. But I would argue it's like maybe all of it because it's like, if you do a hero workout once a year, that's consistent training, I guess, because you do it every year once. But if you could do them a little closer together, you could probably get a lot more fitness, and you could get all of your workouts wrong and get a lot of fitness out of just doing them. So if there's something that you like to do, if it's like, well, we're gonna, for instance, for me, I think a lot of runners like this. Now you see Heather Jackson and David Roach, these people that run and they like to ride bikes. Riding bikes is fun. Mm-hmm. And riding bikes outside is very dangerous, but now there's Zwift and stuff like that. So it's like, and that's fun. So it's like virtual reality. It's great for like winter when the outside sucks and is dangerous. Like your eyes will get scratched from running outside from the wind. So I don't do that, but like, so we'll put that Zwift in there and I love it. And, it's funny that it took us a while for some things to come out in our coaching relationship. Like I was like, I used to I responded very well to lower volume training. And I was like, why didn't you tell him this like 6 months ago? And I was like, I forgot about it because it was so long ago. And then I look back when I was doing primarily cycling for like triathlon. And I was like, man, I was so fit when I rode the bike. I just love getting on that thing and just grinding on it. And it's like that information is so helpful because I could do 3 threshold, sessions a week and it doesn't, tear me down. It just like burns my legs up and I can recover from it. And I think it's fun. It's just, so if you can, if I can help you find those things and we can program them together and get the appropriate amount of volume, because like, we're not trying, as coaches, we're not trying to accumulate a bunch of stimulus. We're trying to get the response to the stimulus. We're trying to get the adaptations. That's the goal, right? Because if you're just piling up too much work, you're no days off or whatever, then it's like, well, that's cool if that's just your hobby. But if you want to make gains, you got to like get the adaptation, get the, don't go over your maximum recoverable volume, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like the overloading can work in the short term and it can work with the young, the young and unexperienced, but it's such a, it's such a problem to the degree where like the fact that you have this past experience where it did work, it feeds into the psyche of, well, it's going to work again. So then I think people oftentimes will look at it as like, well, I'm doing something wrong here, or maybe I'm not, maybe I do even more. When in reality, it's like you captured progress with like wildly inappropriate inputs because you were so like your sponge was so dry that like anything was going to fill it up. But now your sponge is full. So we have to find a way to kind of like get more into it creatively and through ways that are actually going to like kind of actually create what you said, that like the stress and then adaptation from the recovery and everything like that. And that's going to be different based on what they're doing, what their previous training is, and everything that kind of goes into it. So yeah, I mean, that's where the fun kind of individual kind of almost like the communication, like I'm going to get to know you type of side of coaching comes, I think. And because of the better you feel like you can just have a fun conversation with a person, the easier it's going to be just to kind of like almost accidentally share those things at times.
Yeah, and another thing I think that's helpful is like figuring out people's values. So it's like for knowing that mine are curiosity and exploration, like then you're probably not going to be like, well, you should only run on the track 100% of the time. I mean, to be fair, I still find I can be curious about the track too, but
you did across the years. That's pretty close to a track.
Yeah. Oh, the training was rough on that. That was rough. Like, because I was doing so much road running. It was the middle of winter, But I was like, oh, I'm not going to train like this again. But anyways, but so like knowing what if people are like, I only want mastery is like my one of my core values. Then it's like, well, maybe we'll pick a couple or 3 pieces around you, and we'll work towards mastering those pieces. Like, so around here we have Mount Sentinel. Like, so I think, Adam Peterman will use that one, and, he knows like when he's killing that thing, he's ready to mess some stuff up. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so if that's your value, then we'd probably work on that rather than like something new every day, never getting to do the same workout more than, a couple times or whatever. It's not going to suit you as well because you want to master it. So I think, just getting in touch with people's values, as wooey and softy as it sounds, it's going to really help. It goes a long way. And then it also helps me understand how you're going to react when things don't go well, or like for me, okay, again, curiosity, exploration. When we started doing like speed workouts, short speed workouts, I didn't care if I got it right. I was like, let's just see how this goes, see what it feels like. And then I'll be like, and then later I can be like, did I do it well? Did I do it poor? How do I know? And then we'll see next time what happens. And so I'm just curious every time. To me, it doesn't matter that, I sucked or like I timed out at mile 82 of the bear. I was like, I was bummed because I was like, I wanted to see what the rest of the course looked like. And I was like, well, whatever, I got to see a lot. It was really fun. And then I got to think about like, be curious about like what went wrong, or if there was anything I could figure out what went wrong. So yeah, the race strategy stuff is fun too. Cause it's like, you can figure out like how to run the race, like maybe from aid station to aid station, or lap of a track race or whatever. But it's hard to like figure out like, okay, I failed, quote unquote failed or whatever. I only got this much of the race done. What went wrong? And you can't just do it from aid station to aid station. It's like, well, what happened a week before, 2 weeks before, a month? Did I run a race too hard, too close to it? Or maybe it's not figure outable. Maybe like with the bear, I was like, if I run that race 10 times, I bet I finished it at least 8 out of 10. I just happened on my first one to miss. And I'm like, whatever, but other people, I don't understand that part of the ultra running community, is that you're doing this thing that is like so easy to fail at. It's so hard to do. And then when you fail, people are like very sweet. I have a very sweet friend who I know she only cares the most for me and everything, but she was like, I'm here for you when you're ready to talk. And I was like, what are you talking about? That was fun. Like, I feel like that was a success. Like I got out there, and sure, I would have liked to seen the rest of the course, but that's just how it goes sometimes, So it's an odd part of our culture, is that like you failed when because like if you got to learn to shoot a gun, you're going to miss. You're not going to be like, oh, so sorry, I heard you missed a shot. It's like, yeah, that's how it goes, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I know it, like what you explained it, because like if you take that information to anyone outside of the ultrarunning community, they're gonna like their jaw's gonna hit the floor. You ran
Yeah.
82 miles. Like
Yeah.
Nicole had a similar situation to that where she was gonna do a 100-mile race, dropped out at 100K. So like she goes back to, gets to work where nobody there are ultra runners.
Mhm.
And they're like, "Oh, well, how did that race go?" And she's like, "Oh, I only made it 100K." Like, "Oh, wow, that's amazing."
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
one there thought it was a failure that you ran 100 kilometers in the mountains. It's all perspective at some point.
Yeah, my mom posted on Facebook. She's like, so proud of my son. He just finished his 82-mile race. I was like, well,
It's what you
it's
want to
not
make
hard.
out of it for
Yeah.
sure. Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's also another interesting point just in general, kind of from like the coaching side of things, or just if you're unpacking your own training and racing and trying to decide like what to do, is it is good to kind of look at things and think like, okay, like what went well, what didn't, what could I do differently, so I don't like have same situations happening that I want to prevent. But it's also like how much emphasis do we want to put into one day versus all
Mhm.
the data we have from like the months and months of training in terms of what
Yeah.
direction you're going. Like I'm working with a guy right now who he's his training's been going pretty consistently good, from like improving in the metrics of like his pace at certain intensities and things like that. And then he got to a race earlier in the year, and we think he maybe was under the weather. He didn't have any like clear symptoms other than his heart rate seemed to be like 10 beats higher, just kind of across the race, like the hours leading into the race. And there wasn't anything like compelling, like, oh, I have a splitting headache or I've got a sinus infection or something that would suggest he was ill, other than the heart rate. So, he finished the race. The race went well, but it was below maybe his like his expectations. So at the
Mhm.
end of that, we're like, well, did we do something wrong in training? Did we execute the race improperly? Were you just unlucky and you had some non-symptomatic illness that was probably bringing you back a little bit? So, we stuck to what we actually learned from the totality of things, made the right decisions between that race and his next one, and then he went and crushed a goal at his next 100-mile race. So, it was like one of those things where it's like we could have thrown everything out and said, okay, that wasn't a success. Yeah, you finished, but we wanted you to maybe finish a little bit faster. We need to do things completely different. When in reality, it was like we just want to keep continuing on the path of progress that we had been doing the prior 6 months, and then take another swing down the road, and you'll get the results eventually. And that's so much of it too, where, like you said, it is hard to execute a race right. So you're going to have bad races on good fitness. You're going to have good races on fitness you thought was maybe worse than it needed to be, and everything in between. So yeah, keeping your eye on kind of like everything is usually the way to go with that.
Yeah. And I think ultra running is interesting in that I'd say it's like one of the few sports where it's very normal for you to participate in an activity that is not ideal for your body shape or type or whatever. So for
Yeah.
instance, like in cycling, if you're a climber, generally speaking, there are very few outliers. You can be like a skinny, very short person or whatever, and you're just
Yeah.
going to climb these mountains. But like, I'm almost 200 pounds and I run mountain races. Like
Yeah.
generally, if I were in, I don't know, I'm trying to think, another sport that like that. Well, if you look at Golden Trail, those people are not. There's no big muscle people going up that race. It's like very, very svelte people, and so yeah, it's like so I, it's if you think of the physics of it and of gravity and all that, then it's like, oh, you didn't finish a 200 or 100-mile mountain race. Wow, big surprise, like shocker. I mean, I'm kind of doing things that are not like I would be better suited to flatter races. Like that would
Sure.
be
Yeah.
more my wheelhouse. But I'm like, I want to do this thing that is not ideal for me. And so it's funny when it's like people are shocked that yeah, that you didn't finish or you timed out or whatever. I'm like, yeah, it got really hot. And also when you're bigger, if you have more muscles, that's more heat. And so it's like,
Yeah.
it's compounding. I'm hauling all this humanity up and down a mountain. I'm also whatever, it's also getting hot. And so there's all those sorts of things, and you just have to be willing to do that. And it's fun. I think it's the fun part of it too, is like that, you share the stories of, I didn't have any bad stories. I wasn't like doing barfy, crazy stuff or, you know what I mean? Sometimes those are the funnest stories, and ultra running is like, oh, tell
Yeah.
me about that time,
Especially
But
if you get a good video of it too.
yeah, like Andy Jones Wilkins. Remember that one? He's
Yeah.
running down the road, and then I think it was Hard Rock, wasn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
Because
Or was
the
it?
guy
Yeah.
recording it, he was like, oh, there you go, folks. He was like, there's Andy Jones Wilkins' one-word review of the Hard Rock course. It was like right after he barfed. Oh man, I want to say it was like Rock Horton or somebody was filming him, but yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Nowadays, you're guaranteed to get caught on camera.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I haven't ran a big hype Aravaipa like Black Canyon or Javelina or any of that stuff. So luckily I've not gotten into that yet. Of course, I wouldn't care. Whatever. I like hamming it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Scott, I'm excited to kind of have you on board, and hopefully there'll be some listeners here who are like, "Hey, that guy sounds like he resonates with me. I'm going to work with him and tackle their next goal because it's going to be fun to see you kind of actually be able to put some of the stuff that you've put so much time and energy into learning over the years into practice with somebody else." But yeah, was there anything else you wanted to chat about
No, I think that's
or
it. Yeah,
share
I'm
for
just
that matter?
yeah. I mean, I'm excited. Yeah, just hit me up. You can go on Zach Bitter's his coaching page and then scroll down and there's link there. And yeah, just hit me up and we can talk and see if it's a good fit, and then get you going towards your own stories.
Right on. And where can people find you on socials and your podcast and all that stuff too?
Yeah, it's all of my social, or like Instagram is probably the best one. The Scotsy, so TheScottsy, and then let's see, social. Oh, and then Extra Tomorrows is the podcast, so it's extratomorrows.com. So it's about trail and ultra running. You'll see I have some old schoolers on there. We'll have to get you on there sometime.
Yeah.
And then, but I've got some old schoolers on there, like, Tim Tweetmeyer and Pam Smith, Megan Canfield, all kinds of, Liza Howard.
Liza was
Yeah,
on there.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a bunch
Your
of good
Adam
ones on there.
Peterman one was a lot of fun to listen to too. I thought that was a real fun one because you guys dove into some cool stuff and kind of unpacked some of his injury issues and things like that he had. And
Mhm.
thankfully now he's back up and running. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
good stuff.
Christina Pattison is another really good one. If you're going towards one of the first ones, she's a coach here in town. I think she may have moved, but she amazing runner and a legend in her own. And she's also like coaches smoke jumpers and stuff like that. So, and she
Oh, right on.
herself was a smoke jumper. Like, she's like about 100 pounds. So I think she had to gain like 25 pounds to make the weight, like, or something like that. It's like, because you're jumping out of an airplane with like 100 pounds of gear on and then going and fighting a fire by hand. So it's like, that's so hardcore.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's a good one too. Christina Pattison, K-Pat. But
Good stuff. Well, I'll definitely link that stuff in the show notes too. So listeners, if you want to go follow Scott or check out Extra Tomorrows, you'll be able to grab those on the show notes pretty easily. But yeah, thanks a bunch for taking some time to chat.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around to hear more about how I use the products that sponsor the Human Performance Outliers podcast. I have updated a few things, so if you follow closely, you may notice some new details here. I have taken a lot of time identifying these brands, and I'm incredibly grateful that they have provided a product that I use routinely and are also interested in supporting my work here at the Human Performance Outliers podcast. So here is how I use them. S-Fuels is a product that follows a principle of right fuel at the right time. For me, this means I can anchor my nutrition in a fat-dominant way, but not neglect the powerful application of carbohydrates when they are needed. Their product lineup maps the low-carbohydrate dietary protocol that I have used for endurance since 2011. Here is how I use some of their product lineup and some of their second-generation products that they've just recently brought to market. First is their Zone 4 and Zone 5 product. I use these for intra-workout and race carbohydrate targets. I will use the Zone 4 in less glycolytic settings that still benefit from some carbohydrate, and Zone 5 for workouts that I prefer, workouts and races where I want to maximize my carb to other fuel source exogenous inputs. In short, I prefer Zone 5 when my carb inputs are at their highest and I want to kind of go straight to that source. Zone 2 is a fat-based powder that uses C8 and C10 MCTs that are combined with L-glutamine. I use this for lower intensity workouts to help promote higher fat oxidation rates without neglecting energy deficits. So in short, if I'm doing something longer and I want to keep carbs out, but I don't want to have a huge calorie deficit, Zone 2 plays a great role there. Revival is a post-workout race protein powder that I can easily add to some yogurt or a low-carb smoothie to quickly jumpstart the recovery process. I will use a product like this most often when I'm completing training sessions and have a lower appetite or desire to eat solid foods right after, but want to get a jumpstart on replacing some of the stuff that I left out there. Primed is my go-to caffeine source for training and racing. It combines green tea extract, L-carnitine, taurine, and B vitamins, which all combine to help support energy production, fat metabolism, and reduce perceived effort. Life Bars are a product that have been one of my favorites on the S-Fuels lineup for some time now, and they are a great combo of healthy fats and protein that I can have prior to a big training session, race, or simply as a snack on heavier training days. Grain-free breakfast cereal is something that I can sub in for just about any time I would have put granola on something when I was a more moderate high-carb person. So this is a good substitute for that. Oftentimes I will put it on top of things like yogurt as a topper or something like that. If you're interested in more details about their product lineup, the science behind it, and everything else, head over to sfuelsgolonger.com for up to 15% off your next order. And stay tuned for some product giveaways and promos over the course of the year. I got introduced to Janji last year and have really enjoyed having some of their products in my running and gym rotation. Janji makes pants, shorts, outerwear, tops, and accessories. Janji apparel is made with durability in mind and is backed by a 5-year run everywhere guarantee. Each design is informed by a different part of the world through collaboration with local artists and in partnership with clean water nonprofits with whom they have contributed over $1 million donated to clean water solutions. Some key features that Janji really focuses on is lightweight, breathable, moisture wicking, odor resistant, thermal regulation, and a super soft and flexible material. Here are the products that I've been using a lot so far this summer. I'm still going with the AFO middle short for very light, breathable training sessions where minimal pockets and extras are not desired. So think a very humid summer training run where I want as little on as I can get away with and feel like it's not getting bogged down with a bunch of sweat. The 5-inch multi-short. So I'll sub this one in for sessions where I do want a bit more storage capacity that is placed in the right areas or the right spots. So think things like where I put my phone, does it sit nicely? Or is there a spot to put my key where it's not flopping around or poking me in an awkward place or things like that? So I really like the 5-inch multi-short for that sort of a training session. A product I'm really excited about, which isn't necessarily a training gear per se, is the Multi-Pass Mini and Sling Bags. These are the newest items I have started using from Janji. The only question for me is how much stuff do I need, which will determine which one of these I will bring with me. The Multi-Pass is a great for just stashing things like your keys, wallets, phones, headphones, or any item you want to have with you, all while keeping your pockets free from clutter. It's got a nice clippable strap that you can put around your waist or over your shoulder. I'll upgrade to the sling bag if I'm bringing a little more stuff and it's just not enough room inside that Multi-Pass Mini. So think things like the size of a water bottle, or if I'm just going to be on a little longer session or heading to the airport or something like that, and I just need more storage, but with that same type of design with the waist and shoulder options and the clippable strap. So those are two of my new favorite options. Check those out. You can head to janji.com and get 10% off any of those items as well as anything else they have on there by using promo code BITTER10 for 10% off. They're also available at REI. I will give one quick plug, although it's not winter or cooler. A couple other items that I have in my rotation when it does get cooler is the Repeat Merino long sleeve, the Rover Merino hoodie, the Trail Tights, and the Atlas multi-pant. I've been using Element electrolytes for quite some time now. Actually, a while back, I had a sweat test and it suggested that I lose 614 milligrams of sodium per liter of fluid loss, meaning if I go out for a run and I sweat to the capacity where I lose a liter of fluid, I'm going to lose 614 milligrams of sodium along with that. So during these hot summer months, it's not uncommon that I will lose over a liter per hour when working out. So I favor adding some electrolytes to my workout fluids and pre-workout drinks in order to account for this. I also find it beneficial if I spend some time in the sauna and lose fluids fast that way. I currently have 3 approaches to using Element products. First is one of their warm beverage options in the morning with my coffee. Sometimes I'll put about half a pack of Element in there. Again, one of their warm beverage options. So usually that's something like chocolate mint, chocolate chai, chocolate raspberry, one of those. A second option is one of their fruity flavors in my water bottles while I'm training. So if I'm out there and I'm going through 16 to 20 ounce bottles of water, I'm going to sprinkle in some of that fruity Element flavors into that in order to account for that 614 milligrams of sodium that I'm going to lose. Third is their newest option, which is their Sparkle product, which is just a 16 ounce carbonated can with the Element electrolyte powder in it already mixed for you. So I've been using these for long runs and before afternoon training sessions in the gym when I know my fluid loss has been high. So I've been doing a lot of long runs lately, and having a can of Sparkle there to kind of sip at in between pit stops in the heat to cool down and rehydrate have been a great new addition to my training lineup. Just a reminder, their core flavors include citrus, watermelon, orange, grapefruit, raspberry, chocolate, mango chili, and chocolate caramel. Some seasonal options include chocolate mint, chocolate chai, and chocolate raspberry. You can go to drinklmnt.com/HPO, throw in that /HPO, and you'll get prompted for a free sample pack with your purchase and help support the Human Performance Outliers podcast along the way. The reason I chose Delta G over other exogenous ketone supplements is they have the formula and the dosage that is supported by the research we have to date. They have the DARPA grant to design for special forces, 50 plus research studies, and 20 plus ongoing studies. They also have approximately 3 times the amount of ketones in their product than many of their competitors do, which can be critical for hitting the ketone target ranges that suggest potential cognitive and performance benefits. I've been playing around with my protocol a bit during this last training block, so it has changed a bit from what prior protocols you may have heard me mention on here. For like longer training sessions, these are going to be the key points that I'm going to do it. So it's going to be lower intensity but long in duration. I like the long runs. I like these for long runs and even ultra specific long runs, which tend to span beyond, say, 3 hours. And the way I will do this is I will take a bottle of Delta G Performance, that's the blue bottle they have on their website, about an hour into that training session. And then if that session goes beyond 3 hours, I will take a second one. If it doesn't, I will still take a second one post long run as a way to kind of kickstart things for whatever's coming up next. If you're interested in hearing more about it, I did record an episode with Brian McMahon. It's episode 351, Exogenous Ketones and Performance. And if you're also interested in checking more out about the product and signing up for a free consultation to find out how it would maybe fit your lifestyle, you can head to deltagketones.com. Feel free to throw in a promo code BITTER20 for 20% off your purchase of Delta G ketones. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.